Following reports of this weekend's airstrikes near Damascus, fingers are again pointing at Israel. Many believe, however, that before an all-out war breaks out between Israel and Iran, Russia will somehow intercede. And here to explore this scenario is Dr. Nir Boms, a research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center at the Tel Aviv University, and Dr. Martin Sherman, founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Okay, so first question, let's get this out of the way. Is Israel looking at a foreseeable war with Iran in Syria? That's the big question here. Let's start with you.
Since February, the first time when Israel had to confront an Iranian surveillance or Iranian actually armed UAV penetrating into Israel, we have seen an actual war between Israel and Iran in some ways on the ground in Syria. But of course, this scenario has been in the cards before. We have to remember that Hezbollah, the most significant militia, Iranian militia that is stationed in this region, has been here for quite some time with an arsenal of 130 or so thousand missiles ready and armed, pointing at Israel's border. So the scenario of a war with Iran has certainly been in the cards for a while.
Set, is what you're saying.
And Israel, of course, has been prepared for that. And just the last sentence on that, the fact that about 35 minutes following the drone penetration into the Israeli border, we've already seen targets being hit on the other side, means that Israel was indeed prepared.
Dr. Sherman, is this where you think this is all headed?
Well, I think no one can discount the possibility of war, but I think we should distinguish between sporadic skirmishes, even big ones like we've seen at the moment, and a far bigger confrontation. And I think that depends on a number of things. First of all, I think it depends on how much of a constraint the Russians can be, and that depends, I think, on how Israel can convince them that protecting Israel's interests by containing Iran in Syria is not necessarily undermining Russian interests in Syria. I think it depends on perceived American resolve as well to back Israel in any action. And I think in many ways it also depends on Iranian stamina, because for all its saber rattling, as I've said before, Iran is in bad shape. Even without the U.S. withdrawing from sanctions, their economy is in free fall. There's domestic unrest. There's a massive water crisis, which is going to cause millions of people to be displaced. Their currency is in free fall. So they're not really on a sound footing for a large-scale confrontation. However, I don't think we should be complacent.
Right. Well, I want to touch on something you said, which is that, Russia, of course, has interest in this game, and a lot is pretty unclear about exactly what those interests really are. And I mean, we just saw today that 9 Russian fighters were killed fighting the Islamic State alongside Assad's army. So my question is, what exactly does Russia out of this, considering how much skin that they're willing to put in the game here?
Well, I think they want to keep a presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. They don't want to give that up. But I'm not sure how committed they are to the Assad regime or to an alliance with the Iranians. I think basically, many people would say it's an arrangement of current convenience. Although I feel that one of the major elements in Russian foreign policy is their animosity towards the Americans. And doing harm to the Americans might be not an insignificant consideration in any decisions they take.
Well, Nir, I want to ask you, do you think that Russia's cooperation, let's say, with Iran is one of convenience, as Dr. Sherman suggests?
Well, Russia has 3 main interests in Syria. It's security, it's political, and it's economic. Security, as Dr. Sherman said, it's about keeping an arm's length with the Mediterranean, having access to the Mediterranean Sea, having military installations there that's supposed to help its regional hegemony. From the economic perspective, it's about oil, it's about gas, it's about making sure that Russia is going to be the one who's going to be willing and dealing, not just with Syria, but with the entire region. And that connects into this issue of broader regional influence, political influence, selling weapons, systems, etc. For that, Russia would like to have all partners at arm's length and would like to be the arbiter of all of them, including Iran, including Israel, including Turkey, including the Americans if they can.
Sure. And that's certainly what we're seeing play out in southern Syria. But my question is, if the cards fall and we see a war scenario with Israel, whatever form that war takes, fighting Iran in Syria, which side is Russia going to take in that situation?
I'll say the following. There have been many agreements signed that are not really worth their paper that they've signed. The one agreement that has to do with the partially with the Astana Accord and partially with the American, Jordanian, and brackets Israeli understanding with Russia, has to do with the de-escalation zone in the south and the part of Dara. This is why we've heard today the American State Department saying that they're going to see they're not going to like the idea of violating this particular agreement. Russia seems to have some understanding with Israel on this issue. Why? Because that's really what's going to trigger a more harsher Israeli response. I think that what Russia is trying to do is trying to say to the Iranians as well, look, let's try to keep this a bit separated. We are not interested in further escalation. This is not good. We have invested enough in this conflict. We don't want to invest more. We don't want to get other partners involved in all of this. Whether the Iranian stamina and the Assad regime desire to take control over the south as well will prevail, and whether we'll see other response, including, for example, the Americans, the next days will certainly unveil.
Right. I saw an interesting idea published recently that one of the payoffs that the Russians are seeking or expecting is to have Russian companies and Russian corporations take part in the reconstruction of Syria. And for that to be profitable, they can't let the fighting spiral out of control.
Interesting. So you're saying that maybe these interests are purely financial?
Well, no, I think that they may have down the line a big financial stake in the reconstruction of Syria, which may give them a great motivation to keep things below the boil.
Your opinion. Do you think that, given those interests, that Russia would side with Israel in the case that a war broke out? Because remember, as you said, the United States would, of course, get in the mix, and maybe Russia would take a side that the United States wouldn't. But a lot of people think the United States and Russia would have to kind of agree to keep a proxy war away from Israel.
I think it depends on how muscular the United States is prepared to be. But it's all very difficult and very dangerous to predict in Syria. I mean, when the fighting broke out in 2011, I think it was then Prime Minister Barak who said that Assad would fall within a couple of weeks, and we've seen how well that worked out. So it's very difficult to predict, but we can only analyze it in logical terms and try and project that logic into the future. So I think that Russia basically overall has an interest in keeping the flames as low as possible.
Sure. Well, a big question, of course, that we fortunately don't have time to explore is exactly what that war or that potential war could look like in Syrian territory, because until now it's been mostly with airstrikes. But if there was a real war, maybe we'd see boots on the ground. Either way, thank you guys both so much for coming. Appreciate your thoughts always.
Good to be here.